In this lecture, we're going to think about torture and justice. Torture wasn't officially used in England. In England, major crimes were tried at regular assizes, and the verdict was given by juries under the guidance of judges. Now, sometimes this was after putting the suspected witch through an ordeal. In his demonology, King James VI recommended a swimming ordeal for witches. So this is when a witch would be stripped and tied thumbs to toes, and then would be lowered into a river or a pond to see if she, and it mostly was she, sank or floated. The idea was that if she was innocent, she would sink and then could quickly be pulled out by ropes. If she was guilty, it was thought that she would float. And the logic here was that the water itself would proclaim judgment. James writes, "The water shall refuse to receive those that have shaken off them the sacred waters of baptism." Most of Europe, however, used a different criminal procedure, what's known as the inquisitorial system of justice. So here the crime was investigated by court officials. They privately interrogated the suspect and the witnesses, and they kept written records of the depositions. The guilt had to be proved by evidence. Traditionally speaking, you needed 2 eyewitness testimonies or a confession. Now, ironically, it's this rational, evidence-based system of justice that best facilitated the witch trials, because there were very few eyewitnesses to witchcraft. We might think it's because it didn't happen. They concluded it was because it was hidden by magic. If, therefore, the only reliable witness was the witch herself, then she had to be made to confess. And that meant torture, which was used during interrogation in the belief that pain was a guarantor of truth. So interrogators used torture techniques to compress the body painfully. So thumb screws, head screws, leg clamps, which were known as the Spanish boots. Dr. Fian, a Scots witch, for example, was suffered the boots in the 1590s, and afterwards it was reported that his legs were crushed and beaten together as small as might be, and the bones and flesh so bruised that the blood spouted forth in abundance. Alternatively, the body could be agonizingly stretched, something called strappado, where the arms were tied behind the back, the person was raised by the wrists. Or the rack, that was the commonest form of torture, or hanging by the thumbs. In Scotland, there were other methods of torture, for example, the Turkish, which tore out nails. In Germany, they had iron chairs that were heated from below, and witches were often stretched and whipped on a bench. Some suspects were tortured to death. Research into modern-day victims of torture by Dr. Nimisha Patel suggests that beyond sheer pain, what torture does is it causes a fear of death, intense shock, disorientation and confusion, loss of bodily control and the consequent humiliation of involuntary urination and defecation, and temporary lapses of consciousness along with traumatic amnesia. In Scotland, and in England operating outside the law, the self-appointed witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins in East Anglia and Essex in the 1640s used another form of torture, sleep deprivation. Now, this also produces disorientation and confusion, as any young mothers will know, plus increased susceptibility, delirium, hallucinations, cognitive impairment. It becomes difficult to respond coherently, to make decisions, to know what is real and what is not. And the cumulative effect of interrogatory torture is the physical and psychological breaking of a person. It means that rather than eliciting truth, torture will produce anything but. Under torture, people come to believe what they are told. Their ability to reason is eroded, their perception of reality is distorted. An interrogator repeatedly asking leading questions would have found that witches' confessions reflected very exactly his preoccupations and fascinations, that witches made diabolical pacts, that they met in covens, that they had sex with demons, because these were the scenarios that he posed. Yet there are instances of people confessing to witchcraft without being tortured. Why? Well, the fact is that there must have been some people who genuinely believed themselves to be witches, and who had genuinely tried to summon demons or to curse their neighbours or to use magic. Some of those who were accused, often lonely outsiders with various disabilities, may have been mentally unstable or psychologically disturbed. Some may have ingested narcotics. But the confessions that we cannot explain, as Lyndall Roper argues, require us to engage more deeply with the desires and dreams of the witches. Because as well as revealing the fantasies of the interrogators, confessions offer an insight into the fantasies of the accused, into companionship, sex, power, wealth, revenge, hope, freedom from hunger. So in 1645, Mary Skipper was confessed to becoming a witch when the devil appeared to her, she said, in the shape of a man after her husband's death, and told her that if she would enter into a covenant with him, he would pay her debts and would carry her off to heaven, and she would never want. This is the promise of relief from poverty, from debt, from the endless toil of life. 80-year-old Elizabeth Clark said that the devil, in the shape of a tall, proper, black-haired gentleman, had visited her bed for 6 or 7 years, always saying, "Bess, I must lie with you." Another widow said that Satan came in the shape of a handsome young gentleman with yellow hair and black clothes, and oftentimes lay with her. Now, those who are lonely or elderly, or both, can suffer what is known as skin hunger. They're starved of human touch. And in this religious age, for them, these guilty dreams of being desired and caressed may have been mistaken for reality. Or perhaps they fantasized about hope. Professor Malcolm Gaskell has written an article about Margaret Moore, a poor, lonely woman who watched 3 of her 4 children die. And as the last child lay sick, she heard a demon calling to her at the door saying, "Mother, mother, good sweet mother, let me in," and offering to save the life of her remaining child in exchange for her soul. In despair, she offered the one thing she had in return for her child's life. She fantasized. And as a result, she was hanged in Ely in the summer of 1647. These confessions tell us much about people who were accused of witchcraft. In our last lecture, we'll look at why witchcraft trials ever came to an end.